What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WrestleRant. Graham, Gias, and Matthews here, back with another book review. This time an audiobook review. I mean, you can catch it in book form as well. This is all about Jim Ross's latest book. Business is about to pick up 50 years of wrestling and 50 unforgettable calls. So I had a couple free Audible credits over the last number of months after I read Soraya's book, and I picked up a slew of titles from Audible, including this one, DDP's latest book. I think he's written a couple of them in a autobiography, not an autobiography, it's just a biography about Macho Man Randy Savage. That was written about Savage, of course. That was written from someone I interviewed a number of months ago, or last year, I think it was, a gentleman named John Finkel. So I'm looking forward to reading that, listening to it rather at some point and reviewing it here for the channel, probably at some point down the road. That's a much longer audiobook. This was a pretty hefty one as well. This was, I think, maybe 7 to 9 hours. Definitely longer than Soraya's. And it took me a while to get through it. I started it, listened to a few hours, and then got through a good chunk of it when I was actually driving to SummerSlam earlier this month, and then finally finished it in the last couple of weeks. I thought this was really good, though, and I said the same thing about Soraya's book. And I haven't read this book, like the text of it, I just listened to the audio. I feel like there's certain books, if they are available in audio, in like an Audible version, an audio version, I feel like there's certain books that might be better to listen to than to read. And that's not to say the writing is bad. I feel like the writing in this book, had I read the physical book, would have been great. But I just feel like just to hear it in his voice specifically with him being one of the greatest wrestling announcers of all time, you have to hear it in Jim Ross's voice when it comes to the calls themselves and the color that he adds behind it. This is a lot like his two prior books, Under the Black Hat and then the other book that he wrote. I think Under the Black Hat was the second one. The first one, I don't remember what it was called. Maybe that was the first one. But I checked out both of those books. I don't know if I reviewed them here for the channel. I listened to both of those. I listened to the first one in Audible version 5 years ago, and I got an early copy of the second one, and that took me like a year to read. It took me a long time to read, and that was a great book too. Like I said, I don't know if I reviewed either one here for the channel, but they were two great books. And I think that second book ended right around the time he went to WWE. It might have ended right when he signed with AEW in 2019. I'm not sure. This audiobook, or book rather, I just listened to the audio version, like I said. This came out last year. So the most recent thing in the book is from 2023 when he was writing it. And he talks about like the McMahon drama with him leaving WWE and coming back. Now, he wasn't working with WWE in 2023. He's been with AEW since 2019. But obviously, he addresses what's going on because he talks a lot about Vince in this book, among many other events since then. So it's cool that this included a lot of his AEW tenure and some of the greatest calls, including, which I'll get to, Double or Nothing 2019, some punk-related stuff, All Out 2021, the Brody Lee Memorial Show from 2020, among other events as well in recent years. So this really does cover his entire career. It's not like it's one unforgettable call per year in 50 years that he's been in the business. It's some of these calls, there's two a year. Sometimes he goes years in between, not really. Like, I think 2010 maybe, or 2008, around, like, there's a few years that he skips over. I think he does cover 08, 07, 09, 2010, 2011, 2012, and then he doesn't include any calls until like 2015. So like there's a few years that he skips over. But he covers most of the major ones. And like I said, I cannot recommend this in audio version enough, just to hear it in his classic voice. And he does the audible, like he does the narration himself in Audible. So definitely check it out if you have that opportunity. But I'll include some of the stuff that he talks about, not really in detail. Like I won't include what he says exactly, but some of the events that he discusses, certain people that he touches upon, just to give you more incentive to check out the book. But he talks a lot about his calls during the Flair and Steamboat trilogy of matches from several decades ago, widely considered the greatest trilogy of matches in pro wrestling history, if not the greatest trilogy, certainly one of them. So he talks a lot about that, includes a lot of comments on Jerry Lawler, from when he first met Jerry from the Territory days many decades ago. Talks a lot about Sting from earlier on in his career. Talks about calling Ron Simmons winning the WCW World Championship. I thought that was cool because Ron Simmons is, I think, historically the first Black World Champion in wrestling history. So, or at least on a major level. And it might have been someone else, but like at least in like WCW, it was Ron Simmons to my knowledge. So he talks about being there for that. He does talk about the Montreal Screwjob. Now, like I said, he has written two prior books. So keep that in mind while you read this one, that there's going to be plenty of events that you're probably wondering, well, what was going on during this time? Why didn't he mention that? Why did he leave that out? It's because he already talked about it in his other books. And those books are great. And he discusses everything in those, everything going on in his life at the time, career, leaving, coming and going in WWE. Now, he does a good job of briefly recapping it in this book, so it doesn't feel like you're just reading a retread of those other two books. He adds some more perspective, a different perspective, quickly recaps the stuff he's already gone in depth about in his other two books, including the Montreal Screwjob. He doesn't include, which I thought was interesting, he skips over, unless I'm misremembering here, he does talk about the Mike Tyson debut on Raw. He does not include the call of him saying the Austin era has begun after Stone Cold won his first WWE Championship at WrestleMania. What would that have been, 14 in 98? He doesn't include that. I think he just goes right over it. So like I said, he does include the call from when Tyson debuted on Raw, and he gives the backstory behind all of these moments and why it was important, stuff like that. I thought that was cool. But he doesn't include the Austin era has begun, which is considered one of his greatest calls of all time, which I thought was weird. Maybe because he already talked about it in his other book and he called that chapter the Austin era has begun. I don't know. But he doesn't talk about it here. He does discuss Undertaker and Mankind inside Hell in the Cell. Maybe that's another thing, too. He already had like the Mike Tyson debut from Raw, and he had the Hell in the Cell call between Mankind and Taker from 98 that he didn't want to include too many calls from the same year, but he does thankfully talk about that one. Interestingly, when he talks about 1999 and some of the shit going on that year with like the McMahon shit and stuff on TV, the corporate ministry and whatever, WCW creatively was in the mud. And I'm reading all about that in the other book I'm currently reading. I'm reading both. I was listening to this and reading the WCW book, the Say Hello to the Bad Guys book, which is great. And that'll very likely be my next book review. I know I talked about my Becky Lynch review, my book review for that recently, that the next book review would be the WCW one. I haven't quite finished that yet, so that will very likely be the next one. But anyway, interestingly, he talks about with WCW going down the tubes creatively starting in 99. He even says in this book, and he may have said this in the other books, that Vince basically by 99, and this makes so much sense, and it just gives me validation hearing this from someone that worked so closely with Vince during that period, that Vince basically just wanted his own vision on television. And not to rhyme, but like he basically just wanted what he wanted because he knew they weren't really competing with WCW at that point. WCW still existed, but they were basically just killing themselves. Was WCW shooting themselves in the foot with a lot of the dumb decisions they were making outside of the ring and inside the ring in 99 and 2000, and then before ultimately closing and selling to WWE in 2001. But he even outright says in his book here, was Vince/WWE even trying creatively with some of the shit they were putting on their show? Smack dab in the middle of the Attitude Era. Like a lot of the garbage that I'm not a fan of, Jim Ross also was not a fan of in 99. He was calling a lot of it, but he says now in retrospect, were we even trying creatively? Because a lot of the shit, like, what are we even doing here? I will say this as well, which I thought was really cool, not in every single chapter, but in a lot of the chapters, especially early on, like from 20, 25, 30 years ago, at the beginning of each chapter, depending on what year it is, he kind of gives some background with real life events going on at that time. So like, oh, this movie was released in the same year that this came out, and this guy was the president, and all this other sort of stuff, which I thought was really, really well done. I thought that was a nice touch. I don't know if that was something he came up with or if that was something that he was given notes on. Like that sounds like to me like something I would not include personally, but then like the author or like the ghostwriter, whatever, the editor saying, hey, you should probably include some background for what's going on in each of the years that each of these things happened, so people have some history as to what was going on in the world for people that might be young enough to not remember or not even know what the world looked like in 95 or 1987 or even 2002. So I thought that was really cool that he includes a lot of the highlights from what was going on in the world in each of the years that he discusses, at least in the first half of the book, if not a little past the halfway point. But anyway, he also goes into great detail about the McMahons and a lot of the angles they were involved in, which was a lot of them in the early 2000s. And he discusses each of them and like his relationship with a lot of them up until the present day, up until like he questions like their current relationship with each other, the McMahons. Like, does Vince really have a great relationship with Stephanie in 2023 at this point when he wrote it? Probably not. When he was ousted from his own company and then brought back and Stephanie stepped down and all this other turmoil going on at that point. I thought that was really, really interesting. So Definitely check out that part of the book. It's like midway through. I forgot after what chapter he discusses the McMahons, but it's maybe after Vince and Shane from Mania 17 or whatever it was. Fast forwarding a few years here, he talks about being inducted into the 2007 WWE Hall of Fame. And the only reason why he was inducted, he says, I mean, obviously he would have gone in at some point, but Vince kind of rushed the induction, putting him in the same year as Jerry Lawler. This was not the case for Lawler, though. He speculates, if not he was outright told by Vince, that he was being inducted that year because Vince desperately wanted to replace him as the head voice of WWE. And he makes it clear many, many times, as he did in his other books, that Vince never wanted him as the head lead announcer in WWE at any point. He got fired so many times because Vince was always constantly looking for that next main voice of WWE television. But the fans wouldn't allow for it because these other people weren't that good or the fans just did not accept them. Jim Ross is the greatest wrestling announcer of all time for my money. Maybe Gordon Soley is for other people. For me, it's Jim Ross. I wasn't around during the Gordon Soley era, so it's hard for me to say personally. But I would go with Jim Ross for my money, like I said. But even like that's why he moved him off Raw in 2008. And he talked about that in his second book where he didn't know it was coming. He's talked about that publicly a lot ever since even it happened back in 2008 where he didn't see it coming and he almost quit the company out of that because he was blindsided. Typical Vince, WWE playing ribs on him because the guy was loyal. Like, what a concept, you know? But still, I thought that was interesting. And they would constantly have to bring him back because every new person they tried out in that new lead role, aside from Michael Cole, would constantly fail. He went in depth with the first Shawn Taker match at WrestleMania '09. I think he was brought. No, he was around for that. I was gonna say I thought he was gone at that point. I think he was still around on SmackDown, so he thankfully got to call that match. I don't know if he called the sequel. I'm pretty sure he did. Maybe not. He was brought in for Triple H and Taker in 2011, which they did. They included that call here and the rematch, the end of an era match in 2012. I think they included both, if I'm not mistaken. He does a lot of introspective, like a lot of reflecting in this book, which I think is great. Like in the sense that he kind of looks at like why Vince may have had an issue with him and his own personal emotional journey, not just the stuff going on and not just the calls themselves, which is what the book is based on, I know. But he does a lot of introspection in this book, which I think was prevalent in the first two novels, but it's really amplified in this one, which I thought was cool. Like comparing himself to Michael Cole and Jerry Lawler in 2010. Why does Vince want them but not me? And why is he only bringing me in for a Legends night where I'm this old timer and I'm kind of younger than Jerry? So why is he still around full time and I'm not? Like, you know what I mean? So I thought that was really interesting. He talks a lot about the comparisons to Cole and Lawler and Vince's view on all of them. So I thought that was great. Fast forwarding a number of years, he talks about leaving WWE, doing New Japan stuff. I thought he might talk about like including his calls the first Omega Okada match. Maybe he did. I don't think he did. I thought he was on the call for most, if not all, of those matches. Maybe after the fact when they aired on Access TV. I don't remember, but I don't think he talked about those matches in this book. He did talk a lot about his AEW tenure in the last hour or two of the audiobook anyway, discussing, as I mentioned earlier, Moxley's AEW debut at Double or Nothing 2019, the Brody Lee tribute show, basically all the major moments that you would expect. The first Dynamite with Cody Rhodes and Sammy opening up the first ever episode. But yeah, the Brody Lee tribute show, which was amazing. Punk debuting his debut match at All Out 2000. Was it All Out or All? Yeah, it was All Out 2021. He talks about that. He doesn't talk about. I mean, he does talk about his debut, but the call is not from the debut. The debut or the call is from his debut match in AEW against Darby Allin at All Out 2021. Doesn't matter. Basically the same thing. He talks about Brawl Out as well from his perspective. Doesn't give a whole lot of details because he wasn't like present for it. He just talks about some of the stuff that went on with Punk and the reaction to it. He does recap it very briefly. Doesn't go into great detail, but I thought it was interesting to hear his perspective on it in his book. So he does mention that. As far as the most recent events, he talks about the first episode of Collision, and he was going through a lot of health issues at that point, but he still made it for that episode. I think he was also there for All In a couple of months later. But he does go pretty in-depth with his health issues as far as what he was dealing with at various points and why he missed so much television time and where he is personally now, at least as far as when he wrote this. A lot of self-reflection, a lot of talk of winding down, and he intends to do this for as long as he possibly can, and he still is. He's not doing it every week. He's not doing it full-time. They will bring him in when they can, when he's healthy and able to. He doesn't talk about it. I mean, he had like skin cancer in 2023, but he had some other health issues, even just recently, that kind of had him down and out, and he kicked out of that, and he's still kicking ass, and God bless the guy. He doesn't even get into that because it's too recent, and the book came out last year, and he was writing it up until 2023, so I thought that was really interesting. This isn't the last line of the book, but I will end on this. One of the last lines of the book that he includes, and hearing it in his own voice while listening to the audiobook made it even better. I thought this was such a great line to include in the book. I don't know if this was his idea or an editor or whatever. Discussing his own life and the morality of man and mortality, rather, and all this other stuff, he includes this one line, which I thought was so great. He said, "I never want to know the finish, including my own," discussing like how he's going to go out. You know what I mean? And I thought that was such a great fucking line. And it's so true, too. And I thought that was an amazing thing to say because it's so prophetic and relates to wrestling, but even life as well. So I thought that was excellent. But I really enjoyed the book. Those are the highlights. He discussed, obviously, a whole lot more than that. There's 50 calls in the book. He includes where it took place, when it took place, what the match was, what the moment was, what the show was, including giving some background in each year in which each of these things happened, like I said. He kind of goes great in depth with each of the calls and the back history, not just the calls, like the match and everything leading up to it and everything else. So like I said, it's well worth checking out. It's a great book. I would recommend the audiobook because you get to hear it in Jim Ross's voice. The actual book itself, I'm sure, is equally excellent. Like I said earlier, and as you can see in the headline for the video, it's called "Business is About to Pick Up." Obviously, one of his signature calls, his signature catchphrases. "Business is about to pick up 50 years of wrestling in 50 unforgettable calls" by Jim Ross. Well recommended. 2 thumbs up, just as great as his other 2 books, which, like I said, I don't think I reviewed those here for the channel at the time. I wish I did. But they are also great reads, and I would recommend checking out those as well. But like I said earlier, my next book review, I promise, should be Say Hello to the Bad Guys by Mark Raimondi. Gave me an advance copy. Thank you, Mark, for that. The book is awesome. I'm really enjoying it so far. I was really reading a whole lot of it up until a few weeks ago when just life got hectic. But I should be finishing it soon. Should have a full review up here on the channel, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. Not a book review thing, but I am also hoping to review the Unreal show as well. I know it came out a month ago, but I just haven't had a chance to, or 3 weeks ago at this point. Almost 4 weeks. Haven't had a chance to watch that yet. So that review should be up at some point, maybe next weekend, if I can get through the show until then, or before then. I don't know if I will, but keep an eye out for it regardless. And for more book reviews from here on the channel from recently and years ago, all available in the description box down below. You get videos like this early and ad-free. Maybe not this specific video, but other WrestleRant Ranks videos, WrestleRant Radio excerpt, hashtag GSM4GM, and other content here on the channel by becoming a channel member. More information on that down below. At the very least, be sure to like this video, subscribe. All that support is greatly appreciated. Have an awesome one, folks. I'm Graham GSM Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.